So this is the last lecture of the semester. And this lecture is basically meant to cover British history, British cultural history from the end of World War II to the current moment. So this is swinging London to cool Britannia to Brexit, the United Kingdom in the post-war era. After World War II in the 1950s, the 1950s in England are sometimes thought of as the angry 50s, certainly in terms of literature. In poetry, there's a rejection of modernism and a turn towards angry, ironic, unsentimental ideas, and a rejection of foreign influences, a nostalgia for a nationalistic English identity, at the very same time that England's empire is crumbling. This movement in English poetry is called The Movement, capital M, and the Philip Larkin poems that I put on perusal are part of that. So we have a movement in poetry. There is also a change in drama and a kind of movement in drama that's called the Angry Young Men. These are plays written by more working class and lower middle class authors who write about their lives and their problems. The Angry Young Men are named partially after John Osborne's 1956 play, Look Back in Anger. So we do have a real kind of sense of change in literature. And that's the 50s. And sometimes, like certainly in literature, they're called the angry 50s. Then we get to swinging London in the 1960s. And there's a cultural explosion similar to that of the 60s in America. You have music, you have the Beatles, the Kinks, the Rolling Stones, the Who, etc. Right? In America, we call this period the British invasion. But of course, in England, they're not going to call it that. Fashion, mods, rockers, punks, teddy boys, etc. Carnaby Street in London is the center for young British teens and fashion and culture in the way that Haight-Ashbury is the center for American 60s culture in San Francisco and what that represented to a nation. And here I just have some slides of pictures of people in Carnaby Street in London in kind of very representative 60s fashion. If you've ever seen an Austin Powers movie, this is the period that is parodying. So also I want to call your attention to the shopping bag that the woman is carrying that has a picture of the Union Jack on it. This picture of these four guys down here, this is a picture of The Who, the band The Who, and Pete Townsend is wearing the jacket with the Union Jack flag pattern. I just wanted you guys to see how the Union Jack, the flag of the United Kingdom, is being incorporated into fashion. It's associated with the period in a way that it had never really been done before. So this is a very 60s thing, and that's important because when we get to cool Britannia, and this is really talking about the 1990s, inspired by that 60s fashion and music, there's a revival of interest in British music, specifically surrounding the group Oasis and the Gallagher Brothers, Spice Girls, Blur, etc. We have a new Labour government with Tony Blair as the Prime Minister in the 90s. They wanted to rebrand Britain for a new, younger generation, that Britain could be someplace that was cool and open and welcoming to all kinds of people, open to all kinds of culture. Like the 60s, fashion is very important in cool Britannia, as British designers like Alexander McQueen, Stella McCartney, and Vivienne Westwood were extremely popular and successful. And we have this very iconic 1997 Vanity Fair cover that is Liam Gallagher and his then girlfriend Patsy Kensit. Liam Gallagher of the band Oasis in their Union Jack bed, notice that Jerry Halliwell of the Spice Girls is wearing this kind of Union Jack dress. The headline of the Vanity Fair article is London Swings Again. So it's this idea that that cultural explosion of the 60s is happening again and in the 90s, and they're repurposing some of those things, like the use of the Union Jack as fashion, in order to, kind of rebrand the country. So that's the 90s. Then we get to, of course, the current moment, the Brexit moment in England. Before Brexit, though, there are some things that lead up to it that I think are important. In 2014, Prime Minister David Cameron agreed to have a referendum or a people's vote on Scottish independence, which is whether Scotland could separate itself from the United Kingdom. Right? The United Kingdom is 4 countries: Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England. They make up the UK. A desire for Scottish independence has been growing in Scotland, and so they put it to a vote, and 55% of people vote no, but that is still fairly close. It was a very close thing as to whether Scotland would split off from the United Kingdom. And then in 2016, David Cameron also proposes, because there's all this debate about whether England should remain in the European Union, Britain had joined the European Union in 1973. So then we have a referendum, and this is called, the word for this is Brexit, right? Like Britain exiting the European Union, and they just combined that into the word Brexit. 52% of people in Britain vote to leave the British Union. This has been the major issue in British politics for the last 4 years, as it has major economic implications for trade, for agriculture. The European Union is a free trade within the Union. And it has also now created the possibility that because of differences, both Scotland and perhaps Northern Ireland might leave the United Kingdom because they would like to remain part of the European Union and not be separated. And there are other concerns about the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. Ireland is a member of the European Union, and this meant that there was not a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which has sometimes had, huge political and tensions and violence. So the referendum to leave has created all kinds of political issues. And I have these pictures that are surrounding Brexit. The lower left-hand picture is a picture of people who are demonstrating that they would like to remain in the European Union, and they have kind of adopted, the European Union has a flag that is blue with little yellow stars on it, and you can see that they're kind of using that iconography. On the right-hand side, we see these pictures are of young people, mostly men, notice mostly white people, in suits, cheering on the results the night of the referendum. They want to leave the European Union, and they're holding their little Union Jack flags. Likewise, the lower right-hand corner, we have a demonstration of people who support Brexit, and they are using the Union Jack flag. In the last 10 or so years, the Union Jack flag has become more of a symbolic site of controversy about what does it mean? What does it mean when you're using this flag as a symbol? Does it mean simply national pride, or does it mean xenophobia? Does it mean racism? Does it mean something else? So there are lots of debates, but flying a Union Jack flag or wearing a shirt with it, unlike the 90s or the 60s, wearing a Union Jack flag today it is very hard to do so without having people think you're trying to make a political statement. In a way that having an American flag kind of doesn't right now. Certainly not within America. Part of the things leading up to Brexit also show the part of the arguments that people had for leaving the European Union is they didn't want people from other European countries coming into their country to work. They didn't want to feel like they were supporting the people from those countries. They didn't want, they also felt like they were kind of being told what to do by other countries in terms of trade and things like that. And it was definitely Britain choosing to cut ties with other countries in favor of being more inward looking or being more isolated. And that is one of the things that they are trying to negotiate now with how they leave the European Union. This goes along with changes in empire, and I have this nice little timeline of the changes in the British Empire. We go from, like, remember the 19th century, the sun never sets on the British Empire, and it's huge. It is 25% of the world's land mass, to, like, it certainly dwindles in the second half of the 20th century. India and Pakistan become independent. The British withdraw from Palestine. Colonial rule in Africa, all of those British colonies gain independence. In 1997, they have to give Hong Kong back to China. So a lot of the big parts of the British Empire become independent and they're not part of the empire. However, I really want to point out this thing that happens in 1948. The British Nationality Act allowed people living in British Commonwealth countries. The Commonwealth, these are countries that are in some ways like still colonies of Britain. They have a colonial relationship with Britain. And so they allow those people, and a lot of these people are in the Caribbean, to come to Britain. They are British citizens. And they allow them full rights of entry to Britain because they need to rebuild their country and their economy after World War II. And they have a labor shortage. Like, a lot of people die in the war. There's a lot of destruction, right? If London during the Blitz and stuff, they need people to come build. And so they tell people in Commonwealth countries, and they actually ask people in Commonwealth countries, please come to Britain, like, to work to help rebuild. So over the next 30 or so years, 500,000 citizens from Commonwealth countries will come to England. So we have this kind of reversal of colonization. Instead of, like in the 19th century, white, middle-class British people leaving Britain and going to places like India or Africa to help build the empire and make money, now we have people who were former colonial subjects coming back to the mother country to contribute to the economy. So, specifically, and I'm sending you a link to this in the video, we have this Windrush generation. The Windrush, and there's a picture of this boat, is this boat that brings in people from the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, etc. So it brings these people to Britain, and you can see some of these guys, like here they are leaving the boat on the steps, and they have their picture taken, coming to Britain in the 1950s to work because they were asked to work to help rebuild Britain's economy. But this illustrates they were asked, and because they were British citizens, right? They had British passports. Now this becomes this huge problem that you'll learn about in my link, because their children they brought their children with them. And at the time, children could travel on their parents' passports. And in 1971, Britain says, okay, everybody who came gets to stay here in Britain forever. That's fine. You're legal. You have the right to stay here. Now, in these days, this current moment when Britain is much more hostile to immigrants and people from other cultures and nations coming to live in Britain forever, some of those Windrush children, they would have been children at the time, they had no documentation. In the 40s and 50s and 60s, children could travel on their parents' passports. So they didn't need to have a passport. They didn't have any documentation. Then they were brought to Britain, and in 1971, they said, okay, it's fine if you stay here. But recently, in the last 8 or so years, there's been much more of an effort on expelling illegal immigrants. Some of these people who were British citizens, who were allowed to come to asked to come to England, have been deported because they didn't have the paperwork to prove they were not illegal immigrants. And this is called the Windrush scandal. And it's a big deal in British politics too. And the link will go into more of this, but I just want to show you how in the last 50 or 60 years, we've had this real tension in the United Kingdom between are we an open culture? Are we an inclusive culture? Are we inviting these people from the Commonwealth countries? And most of the time, these are people who are not white and who have, in many cases, they speak English, but it's a very different kind of English. And you'll see that in the poetry that I have linked for you guys to read. Are we opening and welcoming to that? Or do we want a national English identity that is not that? Do we want all of these people from different cultures to go away? And that is a real tension in British politics, in British culture these days. And a quick note about the poems. I'm sending you links to audio versions of the poems because for two of the poems, it's really important. For Colonization in Reverse, which is a poem by a woman from Jamaica, and it's written in English, but in what's called Jamaican patois, which is a certain kind, it's like an accent, it's a way of spelling, it's a way of talking that is specific to people in Jamaica. So she is writing in the way that she communicates, but that is not standard English. And then there's another poem by Tom Leonard, which is delivered in a very strong Scottish accent that is also about how well does the United Kingdom incorporate different ways of talking that are associated with being from a different culture, a different ethnicity, things like that. How do these things work at this moment in England? So the other poem you have is by Derek Walcott, who is also a Caribbean author, and it's about how things are changing. He's from Santa Lucia, just a little island in the Caribbean, and about how those things are changing. And then I have a poem by Philip Larkin. Right, Larkin's part of The Movement. That is just a very enjoyable poem, and I hope you like it. So this is the last lecture. If you guys have questions about this stuff, I'll be having a final review on Wednesday as it goes out in my email. Thanks.